This is your coffee break.
Hi, Sarah.
This is wonderful.
I must have hit just the audio call.
You know what? That's fine. I don't know if you can tell from my voice or if listeners can tell from my voice, but I am fighting this wonderful cold, sore throat, amazing combo type thing. So I'm actually really glad you can't see me right now. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. For Southern California, when it's below 50 degrees outside, we all bundle up and get under the covers and complain. So how is it where you are?
Well, I am in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, so I'm
Oh,
maybe a
my.
little bit north of you.
Yeah.
We have about 2 feet of snow on the ground, and it's, I think, maybe in the neighborhood of -7 today.
That's inconceivable.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I'm surrounded by some mountains where it would only be about a 15-minute drive up to where there's some snow. But we Southern California people don't understand chains or anything like that. So there's cars sliding off the road and everything. I'm just going to stay home today.
You know what? I think that's a wonderful idea. Also,
Yeah.
very jealous about the mountains.
Is it flat where you are?
It is. It's so so South Dakota. You can divide it in half. Half of it is mountainous and beautiful, and that's like where Mount Rushmore is, out in the Black
Okay.
Hills. I'm in the flat farming part, where like the little house on the prairie was.
Oh, I love that show. I'm about halfway between the desert and the mountains, about 80 miles east of Los Angeles. So I have a Big Bear and San Gregorio and all within like just where I can see out my window and everything. And then just a short drive to the east and I'm out in the desert, Joshua Tree and everything. So I like to go out there. I liked your podcast about your hermitage. I'd never heard it called that. I like to call it a sabbatical.
Yeah.
I've gone out to the desert before, one time actually overnight, where I drove for about 2 hours off of a finished road, finally like four-wheel driving for a couple of hours, bouncing around. I lost most of my water when it spilled.
Oh no!
And it was just a regular cooler. I scooped up the ice chips, put them back and everything, and finally arrived just way, way far away from everybody. And except for losing my water, I felt great. I was a little nervous about that. Spent about a day further away from anybody that I ever have in my whole life. And outlined a novel that I was going to do for NaNoWriMo, and did some reading and just listened to some audiobooks. And when night came, if you can imagine, absolutely no light pollution at all. I saw every star in the galaxy, it seemed, and satellites flying over. That was my idea of a hermitage. And so it's nice to have the desert close by and a little truck that can get out there. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that sounds incredible. So did you went out there with the intention of doing some writing, or is that just kind of what happened when you went out there?
I went out there with the intention of outlining a novel. For NaNoWriMo, I like to have some outlining so that I'm not completely pantsing it. So I went out there with a special notebook, like 2 notebooks, one for character descriptions, the other for like some outlines. And I made up a little desk. I found a little tree stump that somebody had maybe set up as a
Oh
desk.
my gosh! So you were actually out like in the desert, no tent, no cozy little cabin.
I had a shovel, and if you know what I mean, and not the desert like Tatooine, lots of sagebrush and hills and rocks and trails and things. I think the idea of the Lawrence of Arabia desert, like Tatooine or something, that's romantic. But there are a few areas where I can get to that. But most of the desert around me is pretty much alive with plants and animals and things. I saw kangaroo rats and
Oh my gosh!
red-tailed hawks and all of that. So yeah, not the rolling dunes like C-3PO gets lost in or anything.
I'm appreciating all of the Star Wars references.
thank
I
you.
just needed to say that. So
Oh, thank you.
I'm really interested in your hermitage, and I know we have a lot to talk about today, but I kind of want to ask you a couple more questions about this. What is it that drew you to the desert? Was it the sort of natural setting? Was it the isolation? Was it a little bit of everything?
Before I lived in Southern California, I grew up in Hawaii. And I loved the idea of a great big emptiness. And my picture of the desert was just rolling dunes with absolutely no life. But then I moved to Southern California in 1999 and took my first just drive out. And I'm just on the freeway looking out. And it's like, oh, there's plants, there's sagebrush, there's tumbleweeds. And it was even more intriguing. But something about the desert's isolation from civilization and the kind of the mysteriousness that almost anything could happen out here because you're so far away from everything. I've been to Death Valley a couple of times, and I used to write little fiction stories about Death Valley, where there were aliens there that they were able to hide away. The desert seemed like an escape and just an emptiness away from people. In truth, when I did my hermitage out there, a few times I could hear some motorcycles way off in the distance. There are plenty of people who enjoy the desert along with me, but my image of the desert was like it was another planet where I could be totally alone. And I'm an introvert. I'm not a shy introvert. I like meeting new people and everything. I greet at my church, and I really enjoy that. But I do get exhausted by company, and so if I can travel out to the desert, and I've got this little old Toyota that's 20 years old, and the AC doesn't work, so you just put the windows down and put some good music on. The further I went up into the desert, this was the Mojave Desert Preserve, and they have what's permitted is called roadside camping, and there's some approved spots where they say, yeah, you can camp here. So there was already a fire pit where somebody had been, and the road kind of ended there. So my whole idea was just to be as far away from people as possible and see how that would recharge me, and it did. And just the whole idea of going out there and investing the time, like I'm going out there to plan a novel, and I did. This is the novel that I'm querying now.
Oh, good.
It's a space western, and it turns out a lot of the novel kind of has sagebrush and sand dunes and everything. And I named one of the characters after one of the roads, and it turns out that this novel Sidewinder that I'm querying now has a lot of elements from that sabbatical that I took. There's a town out in the desert close to 29 Palms that's called Wonder Valley. There's a town in my novel called Wonder Valley, and there's a road called Amboy Road, and I named the road Amboy Road. And so I just picked up a lot of influence just from that sabbatical.
I love that. Do you think that was conscious or unconscious?
It was like going on a treasure hunt. And I'm going out there and I'm thinking like, well, I want my main character to have kind of a mysterious last name. I don't put a lot of stock in character names. The parents didn't name them something mysterious when they were born, but I wanted them to have like kind of a mysterious name. And there's a road up on Interstate 15 close to the Nevada border called Ivanpah. So not a conscious decision, but as if you're looking for treasure or something, and something catches your eye and sparks, and it's like, I think that's it. And you reach over and you dust it off a little bit, and that's something I like. That's a good name. So I got that. And then Amboy Road, Wonder Valley, those are all not very well known, but there's a certain character to them.
I've often felt as a writer that I'm some sort of collector. Like I go through life, I can use that in a novel, and I can use that in a novel, and just picking and choosing these beautiful little gems that sort of catch our eye. So thank you for saying that. I'm glad that you brought that up. I also love the idea of going into this big empty space. I also think of writers as, or maybe it's just me, as possibility addicts. I get so thrilled by the possibility of being alone in a cabin by myself for like 4 days. What can I create? The possibility is intoxicating. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that as well.
Yeah, the possibility addict, that resonates. I remember, even in high school and things, being like that and hanging out with friends, and we all kind of like to try to make up science fiction stories, just like the pulp science fiction we used to read. And my friend lit up a cigarette. And the other friend who's kind of against smoking was like, well, what if cigarettes cried out when you smoked them? And I said, well, then people wouldn't want to smoke. And then another person's like, well, what if on another planet? What if in the rest of the galaxy, all cigarettes cried when you smoked them? And we nodded our heads. And then it wasn't me. I wish it was me. Somebody was like, Earth cigarettes would be so valuable. And we suddenly had an awesome science fiction story where aliens come to Earth to steal all the cigarettes. And I don't know if we ever really wrote it, but that's that possibility addict where we kind of brainstormed on an outrageous idea, and brainstorming is almost more fun than the writing there. And
it is.
It was that possibility that you're talking about.
There is. And there's something really cool, too, about having friends there, about having someone to collaborate with.
Yeah.
Jumpstart those ideas with. So it's almost the opposite of, that was with a group of friends versus your sabbatical or your hermitage, right, where you were kind of just purely isolated. Was there a difference there in the brainstorming?
Yeah, absolutely. Because being around my friends, I'm a different person. Being around, and this was a very close group of friends that I grew up with. They will bring out parts of me that won't come out when I'm alone. They give me a certain kind of courage
Mm.
to maybe speak my mind more. And it's, being alone, I might be able to, if I'm journaling or writing or something, I might be able to reveal something to myself that's very personal. But with my friends and with these really close friends, the kind of friends that you might have in high school who are, I was a bit of an outcast and so were they. We were the
Hmm.
kind of the invisible crowd. Being around them gave me a certain intimacy that gave me a certain boldness to brainstorm outrageous ideas. Something that I couldn't even do alone, which is interesting because I like to be like, oh, I'm just a loner. I don't have any friends. I don't walk around on my black coat and in the desert. But I have to admit, though, that being around certain people does allow me to open up and shine in a way that I can't when I'm alone. And it's something hard for a loner to admit. Yeah, I need to be around people sometimes, especially if I want to write well.
Oh my gosh, it totally is. And there's such a romantic image of a writer as this, this outcast living in like a lighthouse and smoking a pipe and
Oh
banging in a
yeah.
typewriter just all alone. But I think there's a pretty long history of, collaboration and writing in not just even in novels, but in how television shows are written and movies and all
Oh
that kind of
sure.
stuff.
I see that even at my work. I work at a church, and I'm a custodian, but I'm included in on some of the planning meetings and everything. And we were just talking about our Sunday service coming up, and I just mentioned, hey, what if we have so and so like do something like this? And our weekend service pastor is like, oh, that's an awesome idea. And just I'm not afraid to mention these kind of things, and it's amazing, like watching these little brainstorming sessions where they can get a little crazy and wild. And I work with a bunch of dreamers. I'm more of a detail oriented person, but it's amazing to work with them and see them just come up with these ideas. And then again, it's bringing out the more extroverted dreamer in me, where suddenly I'm having a little more confidence in sharing these ideas because that's how these people think.
Hmm.
Kind of changes a little bit who I am.
That's awesome. A lot of
Yeah.
people don't have that, and so that's really, really awesome. So I want to ask you a little bit about what writing is doing for you and has done for you in your life. You talk about going on this sabbatical to write. It's obviously a huge focus for you. Can you tell me about your relationship with writing?
As a small child, I would make up worlds. I loved having friends over and everything, but if my friends were over, it's like, no, we can't play with my cars. Let's go play outside. My cars are my world.
Hmm.
And that was where I would go and just create worlds, create my own little towns with their own names. And even though I was 5 years old, I knew how to drive a car in this world, and it was perfectly legal. And then I realized at night, I'd go to bed at night, and I would lay in bed and start making up the stories without using the props, without using the toy cars or anything. And I realized that was my first real story creation before I ever wrote anything. And then one time, probably in about seventh grade, one night I just was telling myself a story, and it was an awesome story. It was about me and my buddy getting in a spaceship and going and rescuing a passenger liner that had been kidnapped by bad guys. And so I wrote the story, and it turned out like 9 or 12 handwritten pages, and I was just so proud of it. And I illustrated it, and then I did like a little audiobook version of it with sound effects and music.
That's
And
awesome.
and I really, hey, I really like to write, and then friends would come with me, but hey, I got a story idea, and sometimes I'd write it and work on it, and so writing kind of became where I could find my identity,
Mm.
and it was also a bit, it was an escape. When I moved to Hawaii, there was a real culture change. I was 8 years old. I was in the third grade, and that's a tough time for kids.
Hmm.
And so I started up the third grade, and the kids were already clicked up, and I didn't fit in very well and didn't really know how. I'd been the teacher's pet the year before in a different school, and now suddenly everything was different. And I kind of withdrew and learned how to just take care of myself and entertain myself with my toy cars and spaceships and things. And then I saw Star Wars, and then it was like spaceships all the way. And
Hmm.
we didn't have toy spaceships back then, so I used building blocks and my harmonica. Harmonica made a great spaceship and a hairbrush, and so I that was my story creation before I was even writing. And then a friend came to me with an idea about a story that I turned into about an 80-page, handwritten page story. And then I wrote a second draft of it. And I realized, when I'm writing, I feel great. And it's an escape from reality, which in some ways is a bit of an unhealthy thing, because sometimes I would not face my problems or be in denial about things. And it's like, I'm just going to go write instead. And I think in some ways that was not entirely healthy, because it was an escape from things I should have maybe been facing up to. I continued to write stories through college. I wrote really bad poetry, just the dark, tormenting college kind of poetry. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And after college, I tried writing fiction, and again, I moved into a bachelor pad, and I had a computer, and I had the opportunity to write, but I didn't really focus too much on it. And then I met a really nice girl who wasn't impressed with my writing and really did not care for my poetry, so we got married.
That's kind of the opposite of what you would think,
Well, that she really appreciates what's real rather than the fake world. And so I really rely on her to kind of hold me accountable, to not be a poser or anything. And so I wrote kind of off and on. And then it wasn't until about 10 years ago that I wrote a whole novel that it's still in its kind of a rough second draft state right now, about pilots that fly spacecraft with their mind, that they're hooked up to a machine that flies the spaceships, and one of the spaceships gets lost, and so the pilot, it affects him psychologically, that his spaceship is spinning out there in space somewhere, and he's walking around on Earth, but he's always feeling lost, and he's always feeling vertigo and things. So it was an interesting story idea. I'd like to develop that again. But I spent a year or so writing that first draft, and then I heard of NaNoWriMo and started hammering out novels every November. And wow, I love to write. And it became my identity. It became my escape. It became my creative outlet. It's, if people come up and, hey, what do you do? I might say, well, I'm a dad and I'm a church custodian. I don't feel like saying, well, I'm a writer, because even if it's true, I am a writer, but I would seem like I'm trying to impress them too much by saying I'm a writer. Oh, what have you published? I'm working on that. It's what I tell myself. And as much as I love my custodian job, and everybody at the church that I work at treats me with a lot of respect, and I'm friends with everybody there. Sometimes if I'm mopping a bathroom or scrubbing a toilet or something, I start to think, I'm just a custodian, and I'm middle-aged, and things happen in my life to kind of put me here. I used to teach school. I used to do all kinds of things, and now look at me. But then I was like, but you know what? I've written novels, and it doesn't matter whether or not will ever publish them. I can wake up tomorrow morning and turn my computer on and be walking on Amboy Road in another planet, or I'm creator of worlds, and I'm a writer, and it's okay if I have to pay the bills by being a custodian. I'm a writer, and I'm doing what I love.
Yes, I identify with that so much. Yeah. It reminds me of, I can just hear the love and passion for writing in your voice. And when you talk about going to your computer and realizing that, I have novels here. I have my work here. I have created something. It reminds me of that line in Firefly, and that has made us mighty. We've done the impossible.
Love Firefly.
Oh, I do too. Well, and you said space western earlier, and I'm like, ooh, Firefly.
I love Firefly. That's how I took my space western. I thought about Benedict Arnold, the traitor of the United States Revolutionary War. And so my main character is like Benedict Arnold. He betrayed the Alliance. He betrayed the good guys, and it didn't work out so well. And so he's off on this planet where people can go to disappear. And, I'm kind of borrowing that idea from Joss Whedon, that, history is full of interesting characters. I don't need to make this story about spaceships and horses. It's about people.
Yes, definitely. So when you're writing and you're sitting down with this great passion to write, what is it that strikes you first when you're writing? Are you writing to create, you'd mentioned before, writing to create a world. Is it the world that you're writing for? Is it the characters? Is it the story? What really drives you? What excites you when you write the most?
It's the characters. I spend time before I write a story. I try to write up a little autobiography of the characters in their own voice. My name is so-and-so, and this is the kind of thing that I've gone through. And I try to write up the life-shaping events that have happened to them, and then I put them into this situation and drive them through it where they are forced to make choices, and hopefully by the end of the story that they've made the right choices. I try to make my stories emotionally satisfying. Somebody once asked me, what is your muse? And I don't know if I gave the right answer, but what I told them was this. I used to work at a fast food restaurant over the summer. I had this girl come, and she was about my age, and I was 19 or 20, and she was dressed for work. She was wearing a nice white button-down blouse, and she looked miserable. She looked like somebody had been yelling at her, or she looked like her dog had just died. And it was busy, but I wanted to, like, hey, life might get better. Hey, here's a free soda. Or I felt terrible for her, and she spent 30 seconds of my life, but I've not forgotten her. And sometimes when I'm writing, I think about her, or I think about anybody who's just miserable, and I want to write a story to tell them that there's hope, that people can be good, that you can be good, that people can take you down, but we can still pull through it, that there's going to be hope at the end, maybe not what we had ever planned for, but that as we live our lives and we keep overcoming things, everything is making us stronger. And what's tough for an introvert, antisocial person like I pretend to be is that if we reach out, if we rely on other people, not everybody's going to be there for us, but there will always, always be somebody, and usually somebody who's been through the same thing that you have. They're going to be there for you. That's one of the reasons why we have pain and suffering. Not that it's ever part of God's plan for that, but if we have pain and suffering, that can always be used to help other people.
Oh my gosh, so much. Yes, I was nodding along with everything you just said there. I'm such a believer in the healing that can come with reading someone's writing. And even if you don't have a community like that, like growing up, I was just thinking as you were talking, I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't have a community to go to when the world was cruel to me, but I always had books. Yeah. I always had books, and those books, that's what gave me hope. That's what, that's what kept me going was I knew that I could turn to books and I could see friends and have a positive message and see that, things are going to be okay. So the fact that you're consciously thinking about that when you're writing is absolutely a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Yeah.
You talk about writing things that are emotionally satisfying. You talk a lot about finding healing in stories. Is this something that you find in writing as well?
Oh, absolutely. I spent last November actually processing a lot of pain that I still deal with. What happened is in December of 2002, I lost my daughter to cancer, and she was just shy of her 7th birthday. So she was diagnosed when she was 3.5, and throughout her illness, I had incredible strength. I had purpose. I'd be at the hospital helping, taking care of her, and she was loud and boisterous, and everybody loved her and everything. And when I lost her, I had spent 3.5 years praying for her to be healed, and I didn't. Losing her, having her taken home to heaven, however you'd like to think, that's not what bothered me. Okay, she's out of pain, she's with the Lord. That's good. What disturbed me the most, I think, was something the matter with me for praying for 3.5 years and not having my prayer answered the way I wanted it to be. Mm-hmm. And I spent the next several years just in a spiraling depression. That it was my fault. I lost 2 jobs after losing her. So the writing began to help me sort through things. So like that first story, the first novel that I wrote was about somebody who was terribly lost and just without any kind of direction, and finally had to accept the help from somebody else to be able to press on. Then in my space western, there's another character who's a young man who's a swindler, and he swindles a church at the beginning of the story, actually before the actual story starts. And they swindle the church through a traveling medicine show, which you might see in the old Western tropes where the healers come in and pretend to heal people. So this young man is a plant. He's come in pretended to be lame, and they pretend to heal him, and the offering comes pouring in, and then the swindlers take the money and leave this young man behind. When I wrote it, I thought, I had a lot of fun with it. But then I looked at it, I was like, my goodness, I remember these. I remember traveling medicine shows, coming to my church and laying hands on people and healing them, and still losing my daughter. The writing was beginning to process through this, that maybe these people were real faith healers who had real faith in God, or maybe these people were just after offering money. Mm-hmm. So I began to process through that. But then by the end of the story, this young man is forgiven for what he does, and people sacrifice a lot to save him. And another character of the story, the third character, sacrifices her sobriety. She used to be a very violent person and then gave up violence and then has to become violent to save him. And it was all about what we have to sacrifice to help others. And it helped me process through that also, that we have to sometimes give up what we hold the dearest to be able to help anybody else. So the writing has helped me process through that. The last NaNoWriMo I did was kind of a stream of consciousness, first-person narrative, which I've never really cared for, first-person narratives. But it's my character living through this in a kind of a metaphorical sense. And it was like journaling for 30 days, like journaling 2,000 words a day for 30 days. Oh. And you might know the healing power of journaling, that suddenly just doing this journaling for 30 days, I stumbled on things that I had not realized. You know, I lost my daughter 13 years ago, but things that I had not realized for that whole time. And I realized, well, I'll go back a little bit. Before I was married to this wonderful girl who did not like my poetry, she was in a car accident, and I came upon the accident, like we were following each other on the highway, and I came around the corner and there was her car pinned up against a guardrail, and another big car that had slammed into her. And she was conscious. She was okay. She was talking and crying in her little car. I followed them to the hospital, followed the ambulance to the hospital. And then in the emergency room, the doctor came out and said, there may be bone fragments in her blood, and if they go to her brain, we're going to lose her. And I went outside the ER, and my friend gave me a cigarette. I hadn't smoked for several months. And I saw that cool, dark poet that I'd always wanted to be. And this is David, who always wanted to be like the ultimately cool, dark poet, and now he's lost his love. He swore he'd never love again, and now he's lost her, and look how cool he is. And so that's who I could have been if I'd lost her. But then on the other hand, I saw us settling down. In the emergency room, I told the emergency room staff she was my fiance, which wasn't true yet, but it got me in. So, but then I saw us like, hey, we're getting married, we're settling down. She's going to want children. She loves children. So I saw myself, on the other hand, not being that dark poet, but being domesticated with a minivan, and that's the path that I chose. So I lived my life with her, with children, and living well. But then, when I lost my daughter, I tried to become that cool, dark character. I started trying to play into this brooding, angry person. But it turned out this brooding, angry person was not the least bit cool. He was really difficult to get along with. Didn't trust anyone, and lost 2 jobs because of that. That I was trying to become something that I wasn't. I was trying to be completely insincere about who I was and completely dishonoring her. And she'd been such a loving person. It took this friend of mine who had lost his brother to sit me down and say, you're really not helping things, and you're really not honoring her by doing that, and you're really not honoring the rest of your family. I mean, I have 5 living children now, and he like named each one of them to me to remind me, look, this is who you still have. This is who you're supposed to be living for now, not her. That kind of woke me up. And it took me joining a 12-step group called Celebrate Recovery to be able to really start processing my feelings and going back and getting healing, because it forced me to go to weekly meetings and put my trust in other people and share with them how I was feeling, and not with immediate results, but having to be patient and slowly see some healing. So that's one of the things that helped. And then, of course, then writing stories, playing out scenarios that I wished would happen. So in this NaNoWriMo, I have become this cool person that I thought I would be. And he's driving around in this awesome car, but he's miserable. And I didn't make that conscious decision that when I was writing this novel, this guy's driving around but he's miserable, even though he can get whatever he wants and he's got a cool car. He's just miserable because he can't connect with anybody. And he ends up just in this valley of sorrow until he finally has to leave the valley of sorrow and trust God again at the end of the story. It's not something I'll probably ever publish, but it was a real month of healing. Nothing I'd ever written had healed me or let me look into myself as much as this stream of consciousness, first-person narrative, playing out scenarios that I had dreamed of happening, and then seeing the results. Like, well, if this really had happened, this is what I would have turned into. So who I am now is a much better person for the choices I made and for the people who've helped me.
What a powerful story. And I want to thank you just right now for sharing that. I'm just really overwhelmed right now by the story that you just told. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
It's hard to move on from such a powerful story. So my gosh, are you okay with maybe one or two more questions?
I'm okay. This is my day off.
Oh gosh, good.
So yeah.
I don't know if I've ever talked with somebody before who's so incredibly self-aware and willing to share some humbling moments with the general public. So what a gift
thank you,
that
Sarah.
is.
I've been listening to your podcast for quite a while, and I feel that you've kind of helped set the tone for that. You're very real in a lot of your podcasts also. I feel comfortable sharing with you just after listening to you each week on your Right Now podcast. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Gosh. I kind of want to ask, you're querying your novel right now.
Yes.
And this is one that you wrote for NaNoWriMo, you said 2 years ago, or is this a little bit older than that as well?
2 years ago, 2013.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about we talked a little bit earlier about finding courage in community with others and collaboration with others. What gave you the courage to begin querying this novel?
I had set a goal at the beginning of the year. I was doing one word, and one word is where I have a single word to concentrate on for the whole year. So my one word for last year was achieve. And I started out in January. I think I had about a third draft of Sidewinder. Publishing is something that's beyond my control, but I want to have something in a publishable state, and I want to try to query. And so I spent 2015, a lot of it just rewriting, doing more drafts, getting up in the morning and writing for an hour when I could, continuing to write more drafts. I sent it out to some friends who were beta readers for me, and I got feedback. And then taking November off to do NaNoWriMo. And then in December, I was just about done. And then I listened to a really good podcast by a podcaster named K.M. Weiland, and it's called Helping Writers Become Authors. Talked about chapter breaks, and I realized that a lot of my chapters end with kind of closure, and that I need to have the end of my chapters not necessarily a cliffhanger, but definitely not as much closure, because it keeps people reading. So I thought I was ready to query, and then I realized, no, I need to go back. So I'm still actually doing that, but I have sent out some queries, because usually a query letter only asks for the first, at the very most, the first 3 chapters. So I had grabbed a copy of Writer's Digest and found some agents. And then I also, a tip that I've learned, I went to a bookstore and found some similar books. And especially first-time authors or new authors, we look in the acknowledgments and they will acknowledge their agent. So I just opened up my notebook and wrote down the names of agents walking through the bookstore, and came home with a list of agents, looked them up on Twitter, looked up their websites, and found what they were accepting. And so I sent out several queries that way also. I have about 5 queries out now. I got one back almost right away and said, no, thank you. And I can tell you, I suddenly really felt like an author. I got a rejection. Everybody's got rejections. My favorite authors have all got rejections. I don't think you're really an author until you've got a rejection. It really just validated what I'd been doing. And my goal for the year was not to publish, it was to achieve. And before the end of the year, I queried and I got a rejection. And it felt wonderful.
You are wonderful. I love that rejection letter meant a good thing for you. I love that. I love that attitude. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for your insight, for your self-awareness, for your story of healing, for your willingness to be a gift and a blessing to others, for your imagination, for your drive, just for everything that you've talked about today. It has been truly meaningful.
Well, thank you. Sarah, thank you for your podcast. I listen to a lot of writing podcasts, and some of them are very technical, which I appreciate, but your podcast speaks to the soul more than anything else. You're not telling us how to write, but you're telling us like why to write. The confidence and the inspiration that your podcast gives, that gave me the confidence to inquire to you about doing this. So thank you for the inspiration and for just shining this light that you do.
Thank you so much, David.
All right.
I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.